Ahmed al-Rashid stood on the marble balcony of his Riyadh penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below like fallen stars. Just 6 months ago, he had been one of Saudi Arabia's most respected businessmen, with a construction empire worth over 50 million riyals and a reputation built on trust and integrity. Now, everything lay in ruins around him. The betrayal had come from the person he trusted most, his business partner and childhood friend, Khalid. Together, they had built Al-Rashid Construction from nothing, securing contracts for mosques, schools and hospitals across the kingdom. But Khalid had been secretly siphoning money for years, creating false invoices and phantom projects that existed only on paper. When the scheme finally collapsed, it took everything with it. Dozens of families lost their life savings, elderly investors saw their retirement funds vanish overnight, and workers went months without pay. The most devastating blow came when Ahmad al-Mansouri, a 70-year-old retired teacher who had invested his entire pension, suffered a heart attack upon learning of his losses. He died 3 days later, leaving behind a widow and 6 children. Ahmed's wife, Fatima, had packed her bags the day the scandal broke. "I cannot look at you," she had whispered, her eyes filled with tears and disgust. "You have brought shame upon our family name." Their children, Noor and Saad, refused to speak to him, their young faces hardened by the weight of their father's failure. The legal proceedings dragged on for months, but Khalid had disappeared without a trace, likely to a country with no extradition treaty. Ahmed was left to face the consequences alone, his assets frozen, his reputation destroyed, and his soul crushed under the weight of guilt and responsibility. Standing on that balcony, Ahmed realized that losing his wealth was nothing compared to losing his honor. In Arabian culture, a man's word was his bond, and Ahmed felt he had broken the most sacred trust. The question that haunted him wasn't how to rebuild his fortune, but how to reclaim his soul. Chapter 2. The Weight of Guilt. The months following the collapse were a descent into darkness that Ahmed had never imagined possible. He moved from his penthouse to a small apartment in an older district of Riyadh, selling what few possessions remained unfrozen by the courts. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional torment that consumed him daily. Sleep became elusive, haunted by the faces of those he had failed. He would wake at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat, hearing Ahmad al-Mansouri's voice asking about his investment returns. The old man had been so proud to be part of what he called a blessed venture, building schools for children who couldn't afford education. Ahmed's attempts to find work were futile. His name had become synonymous with scandal in business circles, and even former friends crossed the street to avoid him. The isolation was suffocating, but worse was the knowledge that his children were suffering because of his failures. Noor had been forced to leave her private school, and Saad's university plans were in jeopardy. The breaking point came during Ramadan, when Ahmed attended Friday prayers at the mosque where his grandfather had once served as imam. As he knelt in prayer, he overheard 2 men behind him discussing the Al-Rashid disaster and how it had affected their families. One mentioned that his brother had lost his house because of the unpaid construction wages. After prayers, Ahmed approached the mosque's current imam, Sheikh Abdullah, a wise man in his 70s who had known Ahmed since childhood. "I am lost, Sheikh," Ahmed confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "I carry the weight of so many ruined lives. How does a man find forgiveness for such failures?" Sheikh Abdullah studied Ahmed's haggard face for a long moment. "Forgiveness begins with understanding the true nature of your burden, my son. Are you seeking to escape your guilt or to transform it into something meaningful? The path to redemption is not found in comfort, but in the willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of others." Those words would echo in Ahmed's mind for weeks, planting the seed of an idea that seemed impossible, even insane. Chapter 3. The Impossible Decision. For 3 weeks after his conversation with Sheikh Abdullah, Ahmed wrestled with an idea that grew stronger each day, despite its apparent madness. He had been reading about the ancient tradition of pilgrimage, not just the formal Hajj, but the personal journeys of repentance that devout Muslims had undertaken throughout history. The more he researched, the more he learned about individuals who had walked extraordinary distances as acts of devotion and atonement. There were stories of men who had traveled from Morocco to Mecca on foot, of pilgrims who had given up everything to seek spiritual purification through extreme sacrifice. Ahmed's idea was forming. He would walk from Riyadh to Mecca, a distance of nearly 900 kilometers, carrying only water and wearing simple clothes. But what made his plan truly extraordinary and potentially deadly, was his decision to walk barefoot across the desert during the hottest months of the year, when temperatures regularly exceeded 50 degrees. The symbolism was clear in his mind. Just as his victims had been stripped of their security and comfort, he would strip himself of all protection against the harsh reality of the desert. Each step on the burning sand would be a prayer for forgiveness, each blister a payment toward his debt of honor. When Ahmed finally shared his plan with Sheikh Abdullah, the old imam was silent for a long time. "What you propose is not pilgrimage, my son. It is potential suicide. The desert in summer shows no mercy even to the most prepared travelers. Perhaps that is what I deserve," Ahmed replied quietly. "But if Allah wills me to survive, then perhaps I can find a way to rebuild not just my life, but the lives I have destroyed. I need to prove to myself and to others that I am willing to sacrifice everything for redemption." Sheikh Abdullah shook his head slowly. "Redemption cannot be earned through suffering alone, Ahmed, but if your heart is truly committed to this path, then I will pray for your safe return." "When do you plan to begin this journey?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Ahmed answered, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. Chapter 4. The First Steps into Hell. Ahmed began his journey at 4:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in July, when the temperature was already 38 degrees and climbing rapidly. He wore only a simple white thawb, carried a small backpack with water bottles, and had wrapped his head with a traditional keffiyeh for protection from the sun. His feet, soft from years of wearing expensive shoes, were completely bare. The first few kilometers through Riyadh's outskirts were manageable, the asphalt still cool from the night. But as the sun rose higher and Ahmed reached the desert proper, the reality of his decision hit him with devastating force. The sand was already hot enough to cause discomfort, and it was only 7 a.m. By 10 a.m., the temperature had reached 47 degrees, and Ahmed's feet were beginning to burn with each step. The sand felt like walking on a giant griddle, and he found himself hopping from one foot to the other, desperately seeking patches of shade that barely existed. His water consumption was already higher than planned, and he realized with growing alarm that he had underestimated the challenge. The first blisters formed before noon, painful bubbles of fluid that burst and reformed with each step. Ahmed's pace slowed dramatically as he tried to find ways to minimize the contact between his feet and the scorching sand. He attempted walking on the edges of his feet, then on his heels, but every surface of his soles was soon raw and bleeding. The heat was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It seemed to press down on him from above while rising up from below, creating a furnace that made breathing difficult and thinking nearly impossible. His white thawb, meant to reflect heat, felt like it was trapping fire against his skin. As afternoon approached and the temperature soared past 50 degrees, Ahmed was forced to seek shelter under a small acacia tree. His feet were a mess of blisters and cuts. His water supply was dangerously low, and he had covered less than 30 kilometers. The magnitude of his undertaking was becoming terrifyingly clear. Sitting in the meager shade, Ahmed wondered if Sheikh Abdullah had been right about this being suicide rather than pilgrimage. Chapter 5. Lessons from the Burning Sand. The second day brought new levels of agony that Ahmed had not imagined possible. His feet, now wrapped in strips torn from his spare shirt, left bloody prints in the sand with each step. The makeshift bandages provided minimal protection and had to be changed frequently as they became soaked with blood and pus from his wounds. But something unexpected was happening alongside the physical torture. As Ahmed forced himself to continue despite the pain, his mind began to enter a different state. The constant burning sensation in his feet became a form of meditation, a focal point that pushed away all other thoughts except the need to take the next step. He found himself thinking about Ahmad al-Mansouri's widow, Saad, and how she must feel waking up each morning to face financial uncertainty. Ahmed's burning feet seemed insignificant compared to the pain of losing a husband and life savings simultaneously. Each agonizing step became a prayer for her forgiveness and well-being. The desert also began teaching him lessons he had never learned in his air-conditioned offices. Water became more precious than gold, shade more valuable than any business deal he had ever negotiated. He learned to read the subtle signs that indicated slightly cooler sand, to spot the rare patches of harder ground that offered brief relief. On the third day, Ahmed encountered his first other travelers, a Bedouin family moving their goats to new grazing grounds. The patriarch, an elderly man named Abu Khalil, was shocked to see Ahmed's condition and immediately offered assistance. "Brother, you will die if you continue like this," Abu Khalil said, examining Ahmed's ravaged feet. The desert does not forgive foolishness, no matter how noble the intention. Ahmed explained his mission, and Abu Khalil listened with growing understanding. I see, the old Bedouin finally said. You seek to pay a debt that cannot be measured in money, but the desert teaches us that survival requires wisdom, not just courage. Allow me to share some knowledge that might help you reach your destination alive. Abu Khalil taught Ahmed how to walk more efficiently on sand, how to wrap his feet for better protection, and most importantly, how to find and conserve water in the harsh environment. Chapter 6. The Kindness of Strangers. Word of Ahmed's journey began to spread through the small desert communities along his route. In a culture where hospitality is sacred and pilgrimage is revered, his story resonated deeply with people who understood both the weight of honor and the power of redemption. On his 7th day, as Ahmed struggled through a particularly brutal stretch of open desert, he was approached by a pickup truck carrying 3 young men from a nearby village. They had heard about the businessman walking barefoot to Mecca and had come to offer support. We cannot interfere with your journey, uncle, said the driver, a man named Faisal, but we can ensure you have water and basic medical supplies. They provided fresh bandages, antiseptic, and most crucially, a better understanding of the route ahead. The young men also carried a message from their village imam who had heard Ahmed's story and wanted to offer spiritual guidance. He says to tell you that Allah does not require us to destroy ourselves to find forgiveness, but He honors those who sacrifice for others. Your suffering has meaning only if it leads to healing, for yourself and for those you have wronged. As Ahmed's journey continued, he discovered a network of support forming around him. Bedouin families would leave water caches along his route. Villagers would offer prayers for his success, and even some of his former business associates began to reconsider their harsh judgments. One particularly moving encounter occurred on his 10th day, when Ahmed met an elderly woman named Mohammed, who had lost her son's college fund in the Al-Rashid collapse. Instead of anger, she showed him compassion. I see that you carry our pain with you, she said, offering him dates and water. Perhaps this is how healing begins, when those who cause harm are willing to share in the suffering they have created. These encounters began to shift Ahmed's understanding of his journey. What had started as self-punishment was becoming something larger, a bridge between his guilt and the forgiveness of his community. Each person who showed him kindness despite his failures was teaching him that redemption was possible, but it required more than just enduring pain. Chapter 7. The Dark Night of the Soul. 2 weeks into his journey, Ahmed faced his greatest crisis yet. A sandstorm had forced him to take shelter for an entire day, depleting his water supplies and leaving him disoriented when it finally passed. His feet were now so damaged that each step sent shooting pains up his legs, and infection was setting in despite his best efforts at hygiene. But the physical challenges paled beside the psychological torment that struck him during the long, sleepless nights. Alone under the vast desert sky with nothing but pain and his own thoughts for company, Ahmed was forced to confront the full magnitude of his failures in ways he had avoided during his busy business life. He relived every decision that had led to the disaster, every warning sign he had ignored about Khalid's behavior, every moment when he could have acted differently. The guilt was overwhelming, made worse by the knowledge that his suffering, however intense, could never undo the harm he had caused. On his 15th night, Ahmed reached his breaking point. Lying on the sand with his feet throbbing and his spirit crushed, he seriously considered ending his journey. The idea of returning to Riyadh, accepting defeat and living with his shame seemed preferable to continuing this torturous path. It was then that he experienced what he would later describe as a spiritual awakening. As he lay staring at the stars, Ahmed felt a profound sense of connection to something larger than himself. The desert, which had seemed like his enemy, suddenly felt like a teacher. The pain in his feet became a reminder of his humanity, his vulnerability, and his capacity for growth. He began to understand that his journey was not about earning forgiveness through suffering, but about transforming himself into someone worthy of the second chance he sought. The physical ordeal was stripping away the layers of pride, materialism, and self-deception that had allowed him to ignore the warning signs of Khalid's betrayal. For the first time since beginning his walk, Ahmed felt a sense of peace. He was still hundreds of kilometers from Mecca, his feet were destroyed, and his body was pushed to its limits. But his soul, for the first time in months, felt like it was healing. Chapter 8. Transformation in the Wasteland. The third week of Ahmed's journey marked a profound transformation in both his physical condition and his mental state. His feet, though still painful, had developed thick calluses that provided some protection against the burning sand. More importantly, his mind had adapted to the constant discomfort, finding a rhythm that allowed him to continue despite the pain. Ahmed's daily routine had become a form of moving meditation. He would wake before dawn, pray facing Mecca, and begin walking as the first light appeared on the horizon. During the hottest hours of the day, he would rest in whatever shade he could find, using the time to reflect on his life and plan for his future. The solitude and physical challenge had stripped away the distractions that had previously filled his life, forcing him to confront fundamental questions about his values and priorities. He began to see how his obsession with business success had blinded him to the warning signs of Khalid's deception and made him neglect his relationships with his family. During his rest periods, Ahmed started writing in a small notebook he carried, documenting not just his physical journey, but his spiritual and emotional transformation. He wrote letters to his wife and children, to the families he had failed, and to Ahmad al-Mansouri's widow, expressing his remorse and his commitment to making amends. One particularly significant moment came when Ahmed encountered a group of Pakistani migrant workers who were traveling to a construction site. They recognized him from news reports about the scandal and initially approached with suspicion. But when they saw his condition and heard about his journey, their attitude changed completely. "Sir, we lost 3 months' wages because of your company's collapse," said their foreman, a man named Rashid. "But seeing you like this, walking barefoot in the desert, we understand that you are truly sorry. This gives us hope that justice exists, even when the law fails us." The workers shared their simple meal with Ahmed and offered prayers for his success. Their forgiveness, freely given despite their own losses, moved Ahmed to tears and reinforced his growing understanding that redemption was possible through genuine repentance and changed behavior. Chapter 9. The Community of Pilgrims. As Ahmed entered the final third of his journey, he discovered that his story had spread far beyond the desert communities along his route. Social media posts and news reports had carried his tale across Saudi Arabia and beyond, inspiring others who were struggling with their own failures and seeking redemption. A remarkable thing began to happen. Other pilgrims started joining Ahmed for portions of his walk. Some were people who had been affected by the Al-Rashid collapse and wanted to show their forgiveness. Others were individuals dealing with their own guilt and shame, who saw in Ahmed's journey a model for their own healing. A particularly moving encounter occurred when Saad al-Mansouri, the son of the elderly investor who had died, appeared at Ahmed's side one morning. The young man had driven from Riyadh specifically to walk with Ahmed for a day. "My father believed in your project because he believed in you," Saad said, as they walked together across the burning sand. "His death was not your fault. It was the result of betrayal by someone you trusted. But your willingness to suffer for his memory honors him and helps our family heal." They walked in silence for hours, sharing water and the burden of grief. When Saad finally returned to his car, he left Ahmed with a message from his mother. "She says to tell you that my father would be proud of your courage and that she prays for your safe arrival in Mecca." Other companions included a young businessman who had made similar mistakes and was inspired by Ahmed's example, an elderly imam who walked with him for 3 days while sharing wisdom about forgiveness and redemption, and even some of Ahmed's former employees who wanted to show their support. These encounters transformed Ahmed's solitary journey into a community pilgrimage, demonstrating that healing often requires not just individual effort, but collective participation. Each person who joined him, even briefly, was both offering and receiving something valuable from the experience. The growing support also brought practical benefits. A network of volunteers began coordinating to ensure Ahmed had adequate water and medical supplies, while maintaining respect for his commitment to complete the journey on foot and without luxury. Chapter 10. The Final Test. With less than 100 kilometers remaining to Mecca, Ahmed faced his greatest physical challenge yet. The route ahead included some of the most difficult terrain of his entire journey: rocky hills, deep sand valleys, and stretches of desert where the temperature regularly exceeded 50 degrees C. His feet, though toughened by weeks of walking, were reaching their absolute limits. The constant friction had worn away calluses in some places, creating new wounds that refused to heal in the harsh conditions. Each step required tremendous willpower, and Ahmed found himself stopping frequently to rest and gather strength. But the physical pain was accompanied by an unexpected emotional challenge. As Mecca drew closer, Ahmed began to worry about what would happen when his journey ended. Would his symbolic act of penance be enough to rebuild his relationships with his family? Could he find a way to make practical amends to those he had wronged? Would the transformation he felt within himself translate into meaningful change in his life? These doubts were intensified by a phone call from his lawyer, who informed him that new evidence had emerged that might help recover some of the stolen funds. Khalid had been arrested in Dubai, and authorities were working to trace the missing money. The news should have been encouraging, but it made Ahmed question whether his desert pilgrimage was necessary or just an elaborate form of self-indulgence. It was during this crisis of confidence that Ahmed received an unexpected visitor. His son Saad appeared at his camp one evening, having driven from Riyadh to find his father. "Mama sent me," Saad said simply. "She has been following your journey and wants you to know that she is proud of what you are doing. She says that the man who left Riyadh a month ago was broken by shame, but the man walking to Mecca is being rebuilt by courage." Father and son spent the night talking for the first time since the scandal broke. Saad shared how the family had struggled with anger and embarrassment, but also how Ahmed's journey had helped them understand the difference between the man they knew and the mistakes he had made. "You are still my father," Saad said as dawn approached, "and this journey proves that you are still the man of honor who raised me." Chapter 11. Arrival and Rebirth. On the 40th day of his journey, Ahmed al-Rashid walked the final kilometers into Mecca. His feet were wrapped in blood-stained bandages, his face was weathered by weeks of desert sun, and his body had lost nearly 20 kilograms. But his eyes shone with a clarity and peace that had been absent for over a year. Word of his arrival had spread throughout the holy city, and hundreds of people lined the streets to witness the conclusion of his extraordinary pilgrimage. Among them were family members, former business associates, people affected by the al-Rashid collapse, and strangers who had been inspired by his story. Ahmed's first stop was the Grand Mosque, where he performed the ritual prayers of arrival and thanksgiving. As he prostrated himself on the marble floor, tears flowed freely. Tears of gratitude for surviving the journey, of sorrow for the pain he had caused, and of hope for the future he might still build. Later that day, Ahmed held a press conference that was broadcast throughout the Arab world. Standing before the cameras with his damaged feet visible, he spoke about his journey and its meaning. "I did not walk across the desert to earn forgiveness," he said, his voice strong despite his exhaustion. "Forgiveness cannot be earned through suffering alone. I walked to transform myself into someone worthy of the second chance that Allah and my community might grant me. The desert taught me that redemption requires not just remorse, but fundamental change in how we live and treat others." Ahmed announced that he would dedicate the rest of his life to helping the families affected by the collapse. Using whatever funds could be recovered from Khalid's theft, plus his own remaining assets, he would establish a foundation to provide education and support for those who had lost their investments. The most emotional moment came when Saad, Ahmad al-Mansouri's widow, approached Ahmed after his speech. The elderly woman, who had traveled from Riyadh specifically for this moment, embraced him publicly. "Your journey has given meaning to my husband's death," she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "He invested in your company because he believed in building a better future for our children. Now, through your suffering and commitment, that investment will finally bear fruit." Ahmed's family reunion was private, but no less meaningful. Fatima, Noor and Saad had all come to Mecca to welcome him home. The healing would take time, but the foundation had been laid through 40 days of walking across burning sand. As Ahmed looked back on his journey, he understood that he had not just walked from Riyadh to Mecca, he had walked from despair to hope, from shame to dignity, and from a broken man to someone ready to rebuild not just his own life, but the lives of those he had failed. The desert had been his teacher, suffering his curriculum, and redemption his graduation. Now, the real work could begin.